I don't care what his ticket says. You look at him, and then you look at me, and you tell me who belongs in this seat. Get him off this plane, or I will buy this entire airline just to fire you. You think you know entitlement. You think you've seen Karens in the wild. You haven't seen anything yet. This is the story of Preston Holloway, a billionaire who thought his bank account gave him the right to humiliate a quiet veteran in Seat 1A. But Preston forgot one thing in the world of aviation. You don't mess with the man who writes the rules. This is the flight where karma didn't just bite back, it ended a career. Buckle up. The rain at JFK International Airport was relentless, hammering against the reinforced glass of Terminal 4 like handfuls of gravel. Inside the exclusive Diamond Sky lounge, the air smelled of expensive espresso and old leather. It was a sanctuary for the 1%, a place where the noise of the general public was filtered out by soundproof walls and high-status credit cards. Preston Holloway adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke Brioni suit. He was 45 handsome, in a jagged, aggressive way, with hair that was graying just enough to look distinguished, and teeth that were bright enough to be threatening. As the CEO of Holloway Textron Dynamics, a private equity firm that specialized in hostile takeovers, Preston was used to getting his way. If he wanted a table, he got it. If he wanted silence, he got it. If he wanted to destroy a company, he did it before lunch. He checked his Rolex Daytona. Boarding for Flight 88 to London Heathrow was in 20 minutes. He swirled his single malt scotch, his eyes scanning the lounge with a predator's boredom. That was when he saw him, sitting in the corner in a prime window seat that Preston usually coveted, was a black man who looked entirely out of place, at least in Preston's worldview. The man appeared to be in his late 60s. He was wearing a faded, albeit clean, navy blue hoodie, charcoal cargo pants, and worn-in Timberland boots. A black baseball cap with no logo sat low over his eyes. He was eating a bag of pretzels he'd seemingly brought from the outside, ignoring the gourmet buffet available to him. Preston scoffed audibly. "Unbelievable," he muttered to his assistant, a terrified young woman named Chloe, who was furiously typing on her BlackBerry. "Sir," Chloe squeaked. "Look at that," Preston gestured with his glass. "Since when did the Diamond Lounge start letting in ground crew, or did the janitor get lost?" Chloe glanced up, her eyes widening slightly as she looked at the man. I don't know, Mr. Holloway. Maybe he's a musician or an athlete." Preston laughed, a short, barking sound. "That guy, please. He looks like he just clocked out of a shift at the sanitation department. It's the credit card points, Chloe. They hand out these passes to anyone with a Discover card now. It dilutes the brand. It ruins the experience for the people who actually pay for it." Preston stood up, buttoning his jacket. He decided to make a point. He walked over to the window, standing purposefully close to the older man's chair. He cleared his throat loudly. The man didn't move. He didn't even look up from the paperback book he was reading. Something old with a cracked spine. "Excuse me," Preston said, his voice dripping with condescension. The man slowly turned a page. He took a breath, then looked up. His eyes were dark, calm, and unsettlingly steady. There was no fear in them, and certainly no recognition of Preston's status. "Can I help you?" His voice was a deep, gravelly rumble. "You're in my spot." Preston lied. He didn't have an assigned seat in the lounge. Nobody did. But he wanted to see the man jump. The older man looked around the empty lounge. There were dozens of open seats. He looked back at Preston, a faint, amused smile playing on his lips. "I didn't see a name tag on the leather Sun." Sun. Preston's jaw tightened. "Do you know who I am?" "No," the man said, simply turning back to his book. "And I'm trying to read, so I don't particularly care." Preston felt the blood rush to his face. It was the dismissal, the casual, effortless dismissal. He opened his mouth to unleash a tirade, but the lounge intercom chimed. "Priority boarding for Flight 88 to London is now beginning for Group 1 and Diamond status members." The man in the hoodie stood up. He moved with a slight limp favoring his left leg, but his posture was upright, almost military. He gathered his small, beat-up duffel bag. "Save the speech," the man said as he brushed past Preston. "You'll miss your flight." Preston watched him go, his hands balling into fists. "Oh, I'm not done with you," he whispered to the empty air. "Not even close." Preston grabbed his Toomey carry-on and marched toward the gate, Chloe trailing behind him like a nervous shadow. He expected the man to turn right toward the economy cabin once they boarded. That was the natural order of things. The lounge was a fluke, a credit card perk. But the plane was where money talked. When Preston boarded the massive Boeing 777, he turned left into the first-class sanctuary. There were only 8 suites. It was the pinnacle of luxury lie-flat beds, privacy doors, champagne on arrival. He found his seat 1F. He tossed his jacket to the flight attendant without looking at her, and turned to see who his neighbor across the aisle in 1A was. His blood ran cold. It was the man in the hoodie. He was already settled in, sipping a glass of water, his beat-up bag stowed in the overhead bin that was meant for Preston's garment bag. Preston froze in the aisle, blocking the boarding passengers behind him. "You have got to be kidding me," he said, loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. The flight attendant, a seasoned professional named Sarah Jenkins, stepped forward. "Mr. Halloway, welcome back. Is there a problem?" "Yes, Sarah, there is a massive problem." Preston pointed a manicured finger at seat 1A. "There has been a mistake, a ticketing error. This is first class." Sarah looked confused. She glanced at the man in 1A, then back at Preston. "I'm sorry, I don't follow. Mr. Sterling is in his correct seat." Sterling. So he had a name. Mr. Sterling. Preston sneered the name like it was a slur. Is clearly in the wrong section. "Look at him, Sarah. Does he look like he paid $12,000 for a ticket?" "He's probably an upgrade, an employee relative, a non-rev." The man, Mr. Sterling, sighed. He placed his water down on the linen coaster. "I paid for my ticket just like you did. Sit down." "Don't you tell me to sit down," Preston snapped. The cabin went silent. A young couple in row 2 stopped whispering. A tech CEO in 2F took off his headphones. "Sir," Sarah said, her voice firming up. "Mr. Sterling is a ticketed passenger. Please take your seat so we can continue boarding. You are blocking the aisle." Preston looked at Sterling, then at Sarah, then back at Sterling. He felt like he was being pranked. This man, this nobody in a hoodie, was going to ruin the aesthetic of his flight. He was going to smell like cheap soap and snore. Preston could feel it. "Fine," Preston hissed. He slammed his body into his seat. "But I want the purser, immediately, and don't expect me to sign off on the service quality survey this time." Sterling didn't look up. He just opened his book again. But if Preston had looked closely, he would have seen the older man's hand resting on his knee, tapping a rhythmic, patient beat. It was the patience of a hunter, waiting for the prey to step into the trap. The aircraft was pressurized, the doors were sealed, and the fasten seatbelt sign was illuminated. The hum of the engines grew to a roar as the 707 taxied toward the runway. For most people, this was the time to relax, browse the movie selection, or close their eyes. For Preston Halloway, it was time to marinate in his own rage. He had downed 2 glasses of Krug champagne before they even left the gate, and the alcohol was fueling his sense of injustice. Every time he looked across the aisle, he saw Sterling. The man was so quiet. He wasn't watching a movie. He wasn't on a laptop closing deals. He was just sitting there staring out the window or reading that ragged book. It infuriated Preston. First class was for movers and shakers. It was for people who mattered. This man was a waste of space. Preston hit the call button. He hit it 3 times in rapid succession. Sarah appeared instantly, her smile tight. "Yes, Mr. Halloway." "I want to see the manifest," Preston demanded, keeping his voice low but intense. "I can't show you the manifest, sir. That is confidential airline property." "Don't give me that corporate speech. I spend $500,000 a year with this airline. I'm a global services member. I want to know how he—" He jerked his head toward Sterling. "Got that seat? Did he use miles? Is he a charity case? A diversity quota upgrade?" Sarah's face hardened. She dropped the customer service mask for a fraction of a second. "Mr. Halloway, keep your voice down. Mr. Sterling paid full fare. In fact, he paid for a flexible full-fare ticket, which is more expensive than the corporate rate your company booked for you. Now please let it go." She walked away before he could respond. Preston sat there stunned. More expensive than me? That was impossible. The man was wearing boots that looked 10 years old. It had to be drug money. Or fraud. That was it. Credit card fraud. The plane took off, climbing steeply over the Atlantic. Once they reached cruising altitude, the smell of warm nuts and dinner service filled the cabin. Preston wasn't eating. He was plotting. He pulled out his phone, connecting to the onboard Wi-Fi. He typed Sterling into Google, but without a first name, it was useless. He squinted across the aisle. On the man's duffel bag, there was a faded luggage tag. He waited until Sterling went to the lavatory. As soon as the bathroom door clicked shut, Preston unbuckled and lunged across the aisle. He grabbed the tag on the bag. Isaiah Sterling. Washington, D.C. Preston smirked. He quickly typed Isaiah Sterling, Washington, D.C. into his search bar. The results were underwhelming. A few generic entries. A LinkedIn profile with no photo that just said, consultant. No Forbes profile. No Wikipedia page. No scandals. A ghost, Preston whispered. A nobody. He sat back down just as Sterling returned. Sterling noticed his bag had been shifted slightly. The tag was flipped over. He looked at Preston. Preston held his gaze, smiling smugly. "Nice bag," Preston said. "Army surplus, or did you find it in a dumpster?" Sterling sat down, adjusting his seatbelt. He looked tired. "It traveled with me through 3 combat tours. It holds up better than most people do." "Combat tours?" Preston chuckled, loud enough for the cabin to hear again. "Oh, great. So we have a PTSD case in 1A. That makes me feel so much safer. Hey," he shouted for the flight attendant again. This time the purser arrived. Her name was Nancy, a stern woman who had been flying since the Pan Am days. "What is it now, Mr. Halloway? I don't feel safe," Preston said, loud and theatrical. "This man just admitted he's a combat veteran. He's acting erratic. He's hostile. I want him moved. There are seats in business class upstairs. Move him there." Sterling looked at Nancy. "I haven't said a word to him, ma'am. I just want to get to London." He's lying, Preston shouted, standing up now. The alcohol was hitting hard. He's been glaring at me. He's aggressive. Look at him. He doesn't belong here. I know guys like this. He's probably got a weapon in that bag. You need to check that bag. Sir, sit down, Nancy ordered. No. I am Preston Holloway. I run a $4 billion hedge fund. I am not going to be threatened by some diversity hire veteran who thinks the world owes him a favor. Preston turned to Sterling. His face red, spit flying from his lips. You think you're special because you carried a gun. You're nothing. You're a drain on the system. I pay the taxes that paid your salary, pal. I own you. Now get up, grab your trash, and get to the back of the plane where you belong. The cabin was deadly silent. The air crackled with tension. Sterling slowly unbuckled his seatbelt. He didn't stand up. He just turned his entire body toward Preston. The calm was gone. In its place was a cold iron hardness that made the temperature in the cabin seem to drop 10 degrees. You have made a mistake, son, Sterling said softly. A very expensive mistake. Is that a threat? Preston screamed. Did you hear that he threatened me, Captain? Get the captain out here. Get him off this plane. Preston reached out and shoved Sterling's shoulder. It wasn't a hard shove, but it was physical contact. That was the line. Sterling didn't strike back. He didn't yell. He simply pressed the call button once. When Nancy returned, she wasn't alone. The first officer had come out of the cockpit. He assaulted me, Preston lied, pointing at Sterling. He grabbed my arm. I saw everything, Mr. Holloway. The man in seat 2F, the tech CEO, said, standing up. You shoved him. He hasn't touched you. Shut up, Preston yelled at the witness. You're in on it. Mr. Holloway, the first officer said, stepping into the aisle. He was a tall man, authoritative. You need to sit down and be quiet. We are over the ocean. If you continue this behavior, we will restrain you. Restrain me? Preston laughed maniacally. You're going to restrain me. Do you know who I am? I know the CEO of this airline. I will have your wings stripped. I want this man arrested. I want him off this plane right now. Turn this bird around. Then Preston made his final fatal error. He looked at Sterling and sneered. I bet you were dishonorably discharged, weren't you? Probably for stealing. That's what people like you do. Sterling stood up then. He was taller than Preston realized. He loomed over the hedge fund manager. He reached into his pocket. Preston flinched, expecting a weapon. Sterling pulled out a leather wallet. He opened it, revealing a heavy metallic badge with a gold eagle and a holographic ID card. He held it up for the first officer to see. The first officer's eyes widened. He stiffened instantly, his posture snapping to attention. He looked from the badge to Sterling, his face draining of color. General, the first officer breathed. Not General right now. Sterling said, his voice clipped and precise. I am currently traveling as the Associate Administrator for Aviation Safety, but more importantly, I am the lead investigator for the FAA's Office of Security and Hazardous Material Safety. Sterling turned his gaze to Preston. It was like a laser sight locking onto a target. Mr. Holloway, is it? You asked if I knew who you were. I do now. But the more important question is, do you know who I am? Preston blinked, the alcohol fog clearing just enough to let the fear in. FAA. So what? You're a bureaucrat. Sit down. Sterling ignored him and spoke to the first officer. Captain under 49 US. Code, file 46503. This passenger has interfered with a flight crew member and assaulted a federal officer. I am officially declaring him a Level 2 security threat. I want his passport information logged, and I want the authorities waiting at the gate in Heathrow. Yes, sir. Absolutely, sir, the first officer said. And, Sterling added, looking at Preston with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, since he seemed so concerned about the legality of the aircraft's operation, I think it's time we conduct a little review of his background once we land. I believe Mr. Halloway owns a private jet fleet, doesn't he? Preston's mouth opened, but no sound came out. You can't, Preston stammered. Sit down, Sterling barked. It was the voice of a man who had commanded thousands of troops. And if you say one more word, one single word, I will have you zip-tied to that seat like the cargo you seem to think I am. Preston Halloway sat. He sank into his $12,000 seat, trembling. He realized with a sinking dread in his gut that the plane ride was far from over. And the landing was going to be hell. The cabin of Flight 88 had transformed. What was once a sanctuary of soft lighting and clinking crystal had become a pressure cooker. The silence was heavy, oppressive. It was the kind of silence that screams. Preston Halloway sat in seat 1F, staring at the darkened screen of his entertainment system. The alcohol was wearing off, replaced by a throbbing headache and a creeping icy tendril of panic in his gut. He was a man who lived his life on offense, attacking competitors, bullying subordinates, and suing enemies into submission. He didn't know how to play defense. Across the aisle, Isaiah Sterling had returned to his book. He appeared completely unbothered, as if he hadn't just invoked federal law and silenced a billionaire. He adjusted his reading light, the small beam illuminating the weathered skin of his hands. Hands that had clearly seen hard work, unlike Preston's manicured fingers. Preston couldn't stand it. The uncertainty was eating him alive. He needed to control the narrative. He reached for the satellite phone embedded in the side of his suite. He needed to call his fixer, a shark named Marcus in New York, who made problems disappear. He lifted the handset. "I wouldn't do that," a voice rumbled from across the aisle. Sterling didn't even look up from his page. Preston froze. "I have the right to make a call. It's a paid service." "Not for you," Sterling said calmly. "You are currently detained in place of Mr. Halloway. Technically, you are in federal custody just without the cuffs for now, attempting to coordinate with outside parties to obstruct an investigation that adds another 5 years. Check 18 U.S. Code, FAA 1-12. Preston slammed the handset back into the cradle. He looked around, wildly. The other passengers were avoiding eye contact, but he knew they were listening. The tech CEO in 2F, a man named David Miller, was typing furiously on his laptop. Preston realized with a jolt of horror that Miller was likely blogging or tweeting about the incident. Preston unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up. He needed a drink. He needed to charm his way out of this. He walked towards the galley where Sarah was prepping the mid-flight snack. "Sarah," Preston said, putting on his best boardroom smile. It was a smile that usually melted receptionists. "Look about earlier. I was stressed. The merger, you know, it's a high-pressure environment." Sarah didn't turn around. She continued arranging fruit on a platter. "Please return to your seat, Mr. Halloway." "Sarah, listen." Preston lowered his voice, reaching for his money clip. He pulled out a stack of crisp $100 bills. There must have been $2,000 there. "I know I was a bit loud. I want to make it up to the crew. For the trouble. Let's just forget the paperwork, right?" A little misunderstanding between gentlemen. He placed the cash on the metal counter. Sarah stopped. She slowly turned around. Her eyes were blazing. She looked at the money, then at Preston. She picked up the flight interphone. "Captain to the forward galley," she said into the receiver. "What are you doing?" Preston hissed, snatching the money back. "I'm trying to be nice. You are trying to bribe a flight crew member to cover up a federal crime," Sarah said, her voice shaking with suppressed anger. "Do you know how hard I worked for this job? Do you think your dirty money is worth my wings? Mr. Sterling didn't just threaten you, Mr. Holloway," Sarah continued, stepping into his personal space. "He saved you, because if he hadn't flashed that badge, I was about to have the pilot divert this plane to St. John's. And you do not want to spend the weekend in a Canadian jail cell." Preston retreated. He backed away, bumping into the wall of the lavatory. He felt small. For the first time in his life, his money wasn't a key. It was just paper. He slunk back to his seat. He looked at Sterling again. He had to try a different angle. The veteran angle. "So," Preston said, his voice trembling slightly, "You're FAA. That's impressive. I respect the troops. My grandfather served. Navy." Sterling slowly closed his book. He took off his reading glasses and placed them on the tray table. He turned his head and looked at Preston with a gaze that was ancient and weary. "Don't," Sterling said. "I'm just trying to find common ground." Preston pleaded. "Look, Mr. Sterling, Isaiah. Can I call you Isaiah? We got off on the wrong foot. I'm a passionate guy. You're a passionate guy. But let's be real. You don't want to ruin my life over a few words. I employ 5,000 people. If I go down stocks tanks, families lose jobs. You don't want that on your conscience." Sterling let out a short, dry laugh. "You think you're the pillar of the economy, don't you? You strip mine companies, Holloway. I read about what you did to Red Line Logistics. You bought it, fired the pensioned workers, sold the assets, and kept the brand name. Those families lost their jobs because of you, not because of karma." Preston's mouth went dry. "That's business. And this," Sterling gestured to the badge on his tray table, "is safety. You see, Mr. Holloway, my job isn't just about catching bad guys. It's about systemic risk. You showed me something today. You showed me that you believe rules don't apply to you. You think safety protocols are for the little people. You think weight limits, maintenance schedules, and crew rest requirements are just suggestions." Sterling leaned forward. "I know you own 3 Gulfstream jets under a holding company in the Caymans. I know you operate them under Part 135 charter rules to dodge taxes. Based on your behavior today, your disregard for crew instructions, your volatility, your attempted bribery, I have probable cause to believe your aviation operations are a safety hazard." Preston felt the blood drain from his face. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Sterling whispered, "that when we land, I'm not just filing a police report. I'm initiating a Section 44709 re-examination of your entire flight department. Every logbook, every pilot, every screw in every engine. If there is so much as a tire pressure reading off by 1 psi, I will ground your entire fleet. You won't fly so much as a kite until I say so." Preston gasped. His private jets were his lifeline. They were how he moved money, how he impressed clients, how he evaded subpoenas. "You can't do that," Preston whimpered. "That's abuse of power." "No," Sterling corrected him. "That is the burden of command. Something you know nothing about." Sterling put his glasses back on. Now let me finish this chapter. The hero is about to catch the villain, and I hate spoilers." The rest of the flight passed in an agonizing blur for Preston. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't eat. He sat in his $12,000 seat, shivering under a cashmere blanket, watching the flight map count down the miles to his doom. The landing gear deployed with a heavy thud, signaling the approach to London Heathrow. The grey morning light of England filtered through the windows, casting a pallid glow on Preston Halloway's face. He looked 10 years older than he had when he boarded in New York. The fasten seatbelt sign chimed. "Ladies and gentlemen." The first officer's voice came over the PA system. It sounded serious. "We are on final approach. Once we land, we ask that all passengers remain seated with their seatbelts fastened. We have been instructed by authorities to hold the aircraft at a remote stand. Please do not stand up until you are personally instructed to do so by the crew." A ripple of murmurs went through the economy cabin, but in first class everyone knew exactly who the message was for. Preston gripped his armrests. He was sweating profusely. Maybe it's a bluff, he thought. Maybe he's just scaring me. He's just one guy. I have lawyers in London. High-powered solicitors. I'll make one call and this goes away. The wheels touched down a smooth professional landing. The reverse thrusters roared, slowing the massive beast. But instead of taxiing to the usual terminal gates, the plane turned onto a remote taxiway. It rolled for what felt like miles, finally coming to a stop in a secluded area of the tarmac, surrounded by service vehicles. Preston looked out the window. His heart stopped. It wasn't just a police car. There were 3 vehicles. 2 were marked police cruisers with the distinctive blue and yellow checkers of the Metropolitan Police, but the 3rd was a sleek black Range Rover with diplomatic plates. Stairs were rolled up to the aircraft door. "Stay seated," Nancy the purser commanded from her jump seat, staring directly at Preston. The forward door opened. The cool, damp English air rushed in. 2 uniformed British officers boarded first. They were tall, imposing, wearing high-visibility vests. Behind them walked a man in a grey suit, Inspector Jameson of the Met Police. And behind him, a woman in a sharp navy blazer, carrying a briefcase, a representative from the US Embassy. Preston stood up nervously. "Officers." "Thank God you're here. I need to report a harassment case. This man—" he pointed at Sterling. "Sit down," Inspector Jameson roared. His accent was thick, authoritative South London. "You do not speak." Jameson walked past Preston, ignoring him completely. He stopped at seat 1A. He looked at Isaiah Sterling. To Preston's shock, the inspector snapped a sharp salute. "Mr. Sterling, sir," Jameson said, his tone respectful. "Inspector Jameson, Heathrow Aviation Security. We received the priority alert from the FAA and the Department of Homeland Security. We are at your disposal." Sterling unbuckled his belt and stood up, grabbing his battered duffel bag. "Thank you, Inspector. I apologize for the inconvenience to your team." "No inconvenience, sir. We take assaults on federal officers very seriously under the extradition treaty." Jameson turned slowly to face Preston. The look of disgust on his face was palpable. "Preston Halloway?" Jameson asked. "Yes, but you don't understand." Preston stammered, his hands shaking. "I'm an American citizen. I demand to see the embassy representative." The woman in the navy blazer stepped forward. She looked at Preston with cold indifference. "I am Vice Consul Eleanor Rigby from the US Embassy in London. I am here to ensure your rights are observed, Mr. Halloway. However, I am also here to inform you that your global entry status has been revoked effective immediately, and your passport has been flagged for review." "Revoked?" Preston screeched. For what? Being rude. For endangering the safety of a flight, Sterling interjected. He stepped into the aisle, blocking Preston's path. And for assault. Jameson nodded to his officers. Take him. The two uniformed officers moved in on Preston. They didn't ask him to walk. They grabbed him. One hauled his arm behind his back, twisting it painfully high. Ow! Watch the suit. This is Brioni, Preston yelped. You have the right to remain silent. Jameson recited the metallic click-click of handcuffs, echoing through the silent first-class cabin. But frankly, given the witness statements we've already received via the in-flight Wi-Fi from the other passengers, I'd suggest you start saving your breath for the magistrate. Preston was hauled out of his seat. As he was shoved toward the door, he looked back at the passengers. He looked for sympathy. He found none. The tech CEO, David, was filming the entire thing on his phone. The young couple was clapping. Even Sarah, the flight attendant, was standing with her arms crossed, a look of grim satisfaction on her face. But the worst part was Sterling. Sterling hadn't moved. He was standing by the door, putting his black baseball cap back on. As Preston was dragged past him, Sterling leaned in close. You asked for the captain. Sterling said, his voice low and hard, like gravel in a mixer. You asked for the authorities. You asked to get the garbage off the plane. Sterling gestured to the open door and the waiting police van. Wish granted. I'll sue you, Preston screamed as he was manhandled down the stairs. I'll destroy you. Do you hear me? I am Preston Holloway. His screams were swallowed by the wind and the whine of the auxiliary power unit. Sterling watched him go, then turned to the embassy representative. Eleanor, good to see you again. Sorry about the mess. Not a problem, Isaiah. She smiled warmly. We've been looking for a reason to dig into Holloway's international accounts. The DOJ has had a file on him for months, but we needed a trigger. Him assaulting a high-ranking FAA official. That's not just a trigger. That's a red carpet invitation. Sterling chuckled. He adjusted his bag. Well, let's not keep the other passengers waiting. I've got a grandson in London I promised to take to a football match. He turned to Sarah. Thank you for your professionalism, Sarah. I'll make sure a commendation goes into your file. Thank you, Mr. Sterling. Sarah beamed tears in her eyes. It was an honor. Sterling nodded, tapped the brim of his cap, and walked out into the London mist. But for Preston Holloway, the nightmare was just beginning. He was sitting in the back of a police van, without suspension, handcuffed, watching his 1A seatmate. The man he called a janitor get into a diplomatic Range Rover. He realized then that the nobody in the hoodie was the most powerful man he had ever met, and he had just handed that man the weapon to destroy him. The holding cell at Heathrow Police Station was nothing like the Diamond Sky Lounge. The walls were painted a suffocating, institutional beige. The air smelled of bleach and despair, and the seating was a hard wooden bench bolted to the floor. Preston Holloway had been pacing the 6-by-8-foot cell for 3 hours. His Brioni suit was wrinkled, his tie was loose, and his stomach was churning with a mix of hangover nausea and terror. He kept waiting for the door to open and for someone to say, "Sorry, Mr. Holloway. Terrible mistake, you're free to go." Instead, the door clanked open and a man walked in. He wasn't a police officer. He was a solicitor named Arthur Pendleton, the most expensive defense attorney in London, whom Preston kept on a monthly retainer. Usually Arthur was jovial. Today he looked like he was attending a funeral. "Get me out of here, Arthur," Preston snapped, though his voice lacked its usual bite. "This is kidnapping. I want to sue the airline. I want to sue the police. And I want to sue that janitor who set me up." Arthur didn't sit down. He placed a sleek tablet on the small metal table. "Preston, you need to be quiet. You are in a crater, and you are currently digging with a shovel." "What are you talking about?" Arthur tapped the screen. "You haven't seen the internet, have you?" He turned the tablet around. It was paused on a YouTube video. The thumbnail showed Preston's red, screaming face finger pointed at the calm, seated figure of Isaiah Sterling. The title read, "Entitled Billionaire Harasses Black Veteran on Flight 88. Instantly Regrets It." "It was uploaded by a tech CEO named David Miller," Arthur said grimly. "It went live 3 hours ago. It has 6 million views. It's the #1 trending topic on X, formerly Twitter, in the UK and the US. Preston stared at the screen. He pressed play. He watched himself. He heard his own voice, shrill and cruel. "Does he look like he paid $12,000? Get him off this plane. I bet you were dishonorably discharged." Then he watched the comments scrolling by at light speed. "This guy is absolute trash. Hope he loses everything. That veteran is Isaiah Sterling. My dad served under him in the Gulf. The man is a legend. He wrote the manual on aviation safety. Imagine bullying the guy who can legally ground your plane. Karma is a queen. Boycott Holloway Textron. #cancel Holloway." Preston pushed the tablet away. "It's out of context. I was provoked." "It doesn't matter," Arthur said, taking the tablet back. "The court of public opinion has already reached a verdict, but the magistrate's court is going to be worse." "Why, it's just a dispute. Preston." Arthur leaned in close, his voice hushed. "The man you assaulted is the Associate Administrator for Aviation Safety. Do you understand the hierarchy? He reports directly to the FAA Administrator, who reports to the Secretary of Transportation, who reports to the President of the United States. You didn't just assault a passenger. You assaulted the federal government." Arthur opened his briefcase. "The Crown Prosecution Service is charging you with endangering the safety of an aircraft and assault. But that's the small stuff. The U.S. Department of Justice has just requested a hold on your extradition. They aren't just looking at the assault." Preston's heart hammered against his ribs. "What are they looking at?" "Sterling was serious," Arthur said. "When you bragged about your private jets and tried to bribe the flight attendant, you gave them probable cause to open your books. The FBI raided your offices in New York an hour ago. They're seizing hard drives. They're looking for tax evasion, wire fraud, and illegal charter operations." Preston sank onto the bench. He felt lightheaded. They raided the office. Investors are pulling out." Arthur continued listing the damages, like a coroner listing causes of death. "The Holloway Textron stock dropped 14% since the market opened. Your board of directors is holding an emergency meeting right now. They're going to vote to remove you, Preston. To save the company, they have to cut off the head." Preston put his head in his hands. "Fix it, Arthur. Pay someone." Arthur stood up, buttoning his coat. "I can't fix this, Preston. And frankly, I'm resigning as your counsel after the arraignment. I saw the video. My brother is a veteran. I don't want your money anymore." The door clanged shut, leaving Preston Holloway alone in the silence, with nothing but the echo of his own screaming voice playing in his head. 2 weeks later. The boardroom of Holloway Textron Dynamics was usually a place of triumph. It was where Preston had celebrated hostile takeovers with crystal champagne. Now the glass walls looked out over a rainy Manhattan skyline that seemed to be weeping. Preston wasn't in the room. He was under house arrest in his penthouse, an ankle monitor chafing his leg, watching the proceedings via a Zoom link. The interim CEO, a ruthless woman named Jessica Thorne, who Preston had once hired because she was manageable, was speaking. "The damage to the brand is catastrophic," Jessica said, her voice tinny through the laptop speakers. "We have lost 3 major pension fund clients. The hashtag Halloway is history is still trending." "What about the assets?" a board member asked. "That brings us to the FAA." Jessica sighed. She held up a thick document. Mr. Sterling kept his promise. On the screen, Preston flinched. "The FAA conducted an emergency audit of our private flight department," Jessica explained. "They didn't just do a walk-around. They did a deep dive inspection under Part 135. They found that the maintenance logs for Preston's Gulfstream G650 were falsified to hide overdue engine overhauls. They found that the pilots were being forced to fly beyond legal duty time limits." She threw the document on the table. "The FAA has revoked our air operator's certificate. They have grounded the entire corporate fleet indefinitely. The fines alone are estimated to be in the range of $12 million. But the asset forfeiture is worse, because the planes were used in the commission of wire fraud, moving money to the Caymans. The DOJ is seizing the jets." Preston shouted at his laptop screen. "They can't take my jets. Those are personal property." "They aren't personal, Preston," Jessica said, looking directly into the camera lens. "You bought them with company funds, and since you used them illegally, they are now evidence." "I built this company," Preston screamed. "You can't do this to me." "We already did," Jessica said coldly. "The vote was unanimous, Preston. You are terminated as CEO effective immediately. Your golden parachute has been voided due to the gross misconduct clause in your contract. Security is currently clearing out your office. Your access cards have been deactivated." "I'll sue you." "With what money?" Jessica asked. "Your personal accounts have been frozen by the SEC pending the investigation. You are broke, Preston. Actually, you're worse than broke. You're in debt." The screen went black. The connection was cut. Preston sat in his opulent, sprawling apartment. The view of Central Park, which usually made him feel like a king, now just looked far away and unattainable. He needed to get out. He needed to flee. He had a stash of cash, maybe $50,000, hidden in a safe in his ski house in Aspen. If he could get there, he could maybe cross into Mexico. He packed a bag, not a Louis Vuitton suitcase, but a nondescript gym bag. He put on a hoodie and sunglasses. He cut the ankle monitor a felony, but he was past caring about laws. He took a cab to JFK. He couldn't fly private anymore. He had to fly commercial. He would buy a ticket at the counter with cash, use a fake ID he'd bought years ago as a just-in-case. He walked into Terminal 4, the same terminal where he had insulted Sterling just weeks ago. The air was thick with the smell of floor wax and humanity. He approached the ticket counter for a budget airline. "One ticket to Denver," he muttered to the agent. The agent, a young woman with bright blue braids, typed on her keyboard. She paused. She looked at the fake ID. She looked at Preston. She frowned. "Sir, this ID, the system isn't accepting it." "It's fine, just type it in manually." Preston sweated. "Let me call a supervisor," she said. Preston waited, his heart thumping. He looked around. People were watching him. Not because he was famous, but because he looked like a fugitive, nervous, sweaty. A supervisor walked over. It was a man. Preston recognized him. It was the same gate agent from the Diamond Lounge entrance, the one he had yelled at for letting Sterling in. The supervisor squinted at Preston. He looked at the sunglasses, the hoodie. Then he smiled, a slow recognition-dawning smile. "Mr. Halloway," the supervisor said, loud and clear. "No, my name is—" I know who you are, the supervisor said, his voice carrying. You're the guy who hates nobodies. You're the guy who thinks rules don't apply. The supervisor tapped his keyboard. I'm sorry, Mr. Holloway, but I can't sell you a ticket. Why not? Preston hissed. I have cash. It's not about the money, the supervisor said, turning the screen so Preston could see it. Across the screen in bold red letters flashed a notification from the Department of Homeland Security. Status no fly list. Reason: federal flight risk. Assault on FAA officer. You've been grounded, sir, the supervisor said, crossing his arms. Permanently. You aren't getting on a plane in this country, not even in the cargo hold. Preston stared at the screen. The no-fly list. The ultimate banishment for a man who defined himself by how high he could fly. He backed away from the counter. 2 TSA officers were walking toward him. He turned and ran. He ran through the sliding doors out into the rain, the same relentless rain that had started this whole mess. He was grounded, stuck on the earth with the rest of the people he despised. And as the sirens wailed in the distance getting closer, Preston realized that Isaiah Sterling hadn't just taken his seat. He had taken his wings. 1 year later, the Greyhound bus station in Newark, New Jersey, was a far cry from the Diamond Sky Lounge. The fluorescent lights hummed with a headache-inducing buzz, and the air smelled of diesel fumes, stale coffee, and floor cleaner. Preston Holloway pushed the mop bucket across the cracked linoleum tiles. He wore a grey jumpsuit with a patch that read, "Sanitation," on the breast pocket. His hair, once perfectly styled, was thinning and unkempt. The Rolex was gone, sold months ago to pay legal fees. His fall had been absolute. The trial had been swift and brutal. His assets were seized, his reputation incinerated, and while he had managed to avoid a long prison sentence through a plea deal, the terms were crushing 3 years of probation, 5,000 hours of community service, and a lifetime ban from all commercial aviation. He was grounded. For life. He dipped the mop into the grey water, wringing it out with hands that were now calloused and rough. "Hey, buddy, you missed a spot over here," a teenager yelled, kicking a soda can across the floor Preston had just cleaned. Preston gritted his teeth. "I'll get it," he mumbled, keeping his head down. This was his life now, cleaning up after the people he used to look down on. The speaker system crackled. "Arrival from Washington, D.C. Gate 4. Transfer to JFK Airport shuttle available." The doors hissed open, and a stream of passengers wearied from the road poured out. Preston moved his wet floor sign to the side, trying to stay invisible. Then he saw the boots. Timberland boots. Well worn but clean. Preston froze. He looked up, his heart hammering a painful rhythm against his ribs. Standing just a few feet away was Isaiah Sterling. The older man looked exactly the same as he had on the plane, calm, composed, wearing that same navy hoodie and black baseball cap. He was holding the battered duffel bag that Preston had once mocked. Sterling stopped. He looked at the floor, then at the mop, and finally he looked at Preston. There was a moment of silence that stretched for an eternity. The bus station noise seemed to fade away. Preston wanted to run. He wanted to hide, but his feet were glued to the floor. Shame, hot and suffocating, washed over him. He gripped the mop handle like a lifeline. "Mr. Holloway," Sterling said. His voice was not angry. It wasn't mocking. It was just factual. "Mr. Sterling," Preston whispered, his voice cracking. Sterling looked at the jumpsuit. He looked at the bus station surroundings. He didn't smile. There was no gloating in his eyes, only a quiet, somber recognition of justice served. "I see you found a new line of work," Sterling said softly. I have to pay the fines," Preston stammered. "It's community service, and I need the money." Sterling nodded slowly. "Honest work, hard work. There is dignity in cleaning, Preston. More dignity than in bullying." Preston looked down at his boots. "I lost everything. The planes, the company, my house." "You lost the things you thought made you a man," Sterling corrected him. "Now you have the chance to find out who you actually are when the wallet is empty." Sterling shifted his bag on his shoulder. "I'm heading to London again. My grandson is graduating." The mention of London, a flight, hit Preston like a physical blow. He looked up, eyes stinging with tears. "I can't fly. I can't ever fly again." "I know," Sterling said. "I signed the order." Sterling reached into his pocket. For a second, Preston flinched, remembering the badge. But Sterling pulled out a $5 bill. "The floor looks good," Sterling said. "You missed a spot by the trash can, though. Details matter, Preston. In aviation and in life." He placed the $5 bill in Preston's tip jar on the cleaning cart. "Good luck, son." Sterling turned and walked away, his limp slightly noticeable, moving toward the shuttle that would take him to the airport, to the first-class lounge, to the champagne, to the sky. Preston watched him go. He watched the man he had called garbage walk into the light while he remained in the dim, diesel-scented purgatory of the bus station. Through the dirty glass doors, Preston saw a plane taking off from the nearby airport, climbing steeply into the clouds. He watched it until it was just a speck disappearing into a world he could no longer touch. He looked at the mop in his hand. He looked at the $5 in the jar. Preston Holloway took a breath, dipped the mop back into the bucket, and started scrubbing the spot he had missed. Wow. Talk about a landing you didn't see coming. Preston Holloway thought his bank account gave him the right to treat people like dirt. But he learned the hard way that in the sky, safety and respect are the only currencies that matter. He lost his wings, his fortune, and his freedom, all because he couldn't show basic human decency to a man in a hoodie. It's a powerful reminder. You never know who you're talking to. The quiet person reading a book might just be the one holding the keys to your future. Treat everyone with respect, not because of who they are, but because of who you are. If you enjoyed this story of high-altitude justice, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel soar. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story. What do you think? Did Preston deserve a lifetime ban, or was the punishment too harsh? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.